Let's move on to CSS pseudo selectors. Pseudo selectors include both pseudo classes and pseudo elements. So the obvious question is, what is the difference between a pseudo class and a pseudo element? Well, a pseudo class is a selector that selects elements that are in a specific state. So if we look at our starter code, and this is the code that wrapped up the mini project in the last lesson, so we're just starting with that. And if we scroll down to the links, we can see some of these different states. We're styling for the focus state, the hover state, the visited state, and then just a basic link, which we actually could have added on the pseudo class link here as well if we wanted to, because that is the unvisited link. So there's different states there. There's even an active one that we could have styled. And for all of those are different specific states of the element. So a pseudo class. Now a pseudo element is similar, but they act like you've added a new HTML element into your document. And also pseudo elements use 2 colons instead of the 1 we see here with pseudo classes. So we'll look at those as well. But we're going to look at pseudo classes first. And again, this starter code is what we have from the previous tutorial, the mini project that created this small staff page of 3 employees for the Acme code that we see here, and created profile cards for each one. So that link will be available in the description if you want to download this starter source code. We're not really going to change the project for the better today. I'm just going to use it for some examples that you may not want to keep in the project at all, but I'm going to show you how pseudo classes and pseudo elements work. Now we're already familiar with the different pseudo classes here that we've applied to links, and we've looked at a couple of other pseudo classes along the way during this CSS for Beginners tutorial series. One other one that we could add here is active. So let's go ahead and put a nav and an anchor, and then we'll put active. And let's just style this so we can really tell the difference. So we'll say red, so it'll just really stand out. Now this should be when we hold down on the button on the link, and then it turns red. I have my mouse button for the click held down right now. When I let go, of course, it goes ahead and completes and scrolls to the ID for the employee that we expect it to. But that is the active state. Now let's refactor a couple of these for the better with things we can learn about new pseudo classes today. So notice here we have a descendant selector, and that means we have a nav, and then we're selecting any anchor element inside the nav element, and then we're applying the state. But then when we choose focus, besides hover, we have to say nav A again. Well, we can stop some of that by using the is pseudo class. So if I put is here, and then put a parentheses after it, then I can eliminate repeating this nav element here, and then just once again say anchor focus. So we're just putting the one nav, but now we're saying inside of that, if it is an anchor with hover or anchor with focus, then style accordingly. So this should give us the same results. And as I mouse over here on our page, we see that it still works. And we've made our code a little drier, and dry is an acronym for do not repeat. So we managed to write just a little less code and get the same result by using the is pseudo selector. Now sometimes we can discover a pseudo selector, and again these are pseudo classes. I say pseudo selector synonymously, but we are making a selection. But make no mistake, we are using pseudo classes right now. Sometimes we can discover a pseudo class that will also save us some time, and that is the case here. Besides link and visited, where we're styling both, let me remove all of this, and then I can just put any dash link. And the any link pseudo class selects both the link and the visited pseudo class. So now when I save, we should once again have the same results. Now this is unvisited, or if we click Jane, now we visited Jane, and she still has the styling that we expect that we had previously in the project, but we have once again made our code just a little drier by learning more about pseudo classes. Now just for an example, I'm going to scroll up where we have our header and footer right here, and we're choosing both of those in a list of elements essentially to apply the same styles. Now I will not make this code drier by applying this, but I just want to show the example. We could use is here and then list these elements inside, and there's really no reason to do it other than this example right now, but I do want to show the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Right now, this will be the same as what we had before, but we've just added this extra code. But notice when I mouse over here in Visual Studio Code, we get the selector specificity and it is displayed. It's 001. So it's not high specificity. We could override it. Just in this header area here, we could overwrite what's on the header, or we have a footer area down here just a little bit lower, and we could put something there and it would overwrite what we have in here. But if we put something else in here like a class, and I'll temporarily do this, it won't make our project look good, but now we have put a class inside the is as well. And notice our specificity selector is going to pop up and it's changed. Instead of 001, now it's a whole level higher. It is 010. So it has higher specificity. And now if I were to put a different color here in the header, for example, so I will go ahead and do that. And I'll just give it red so we would definitely notice and save. Notice the text in our header is still the white smoke color. It is not red. And that's because this has a higher specificity. Even though it comes first and it's not down here in the cascade, the higher specificity keeps these styles. However, if I remove this class and it goes back to the lower specificity, now it turned red. So that's something to note about using is. It's going to adopt whatever has the highest specificity within its parentheses. Now, one other thing we can do, let me put card back, is instead of using is, there is another pseudo class that works almost identically, and it's where. It will accomplish the same thing, except it does not have any specificity. So notice when I mouse over it, the specificity is 000, or basically a lack thereof. It does not have any. So you can overwrite whatever is inside the where pseudo class. So that's also worth knowing. So I just wanted to use this to demonstrate. We're not really going to leave these here for your finished code, but just remember those tips about the specificity when it comes to is and where pseudo classes. Now I'm going to scroll down to the card class. So we have that right here is the profile card. Right underneath the card class, I'm going to type card once again, and then I'm going to give it a target pseudo class. Inside the target pseudo class, I'm going to say border 2 pixels solid and give this Rebecca purple and save. Now let's see what this does. You can see Jane has a purple border now, 2 pixels solid purple all around her profile card. She is the last profile card that we selected here. So if I choose Joe instead, now he has the purple border because he was the target. If I scroll back up, Jane no longer has that purple border. So what we're saying with the target pseudo class is whoever is selected, whoever is the target of our selection will have that purple border. And now Matt has that purple border. So that could be a useful class if you really want to highlight whatever was selected. And if you remember in our HTML, how we're doing that is using the anchor tag, but then it is a page link. It's not going to a different page. It just has the # or the hashtag, if you will, for profile 1 or profile 2 or profile 3 that matches up with the IDs of these cards, which are in article elements. So there is the ID of profile 1, and then if we come down to the next article, profile 2, and so on. So these are just on-page links with anchors, and whoever is the target gets that outline. Now I'm going to scroll down just a little bit further under the card class once again, and then the image element. So after that, let's add another card, and then let's add an image, and first let's go ahead and just put in alt. Now if you haven't seen this yet, this means I'm selecting any image with the alt attribute. So we can base our selectors on attributes. Inside this, I'm going to once again add a border. Let's make this really big. So 10 pixels, solid red. And if I save, we should see that around all of our images because they do all have alt tags or alt attributes added to their image tag, actually is how I should say that. So what if we wanted to say, just let us know which images we forgot to put an alt attribute on. Well, we can do that with the not pseudo class. So after image, we'll say not, and then wrap the attribute in parentheses. So this would actually serve to help us check our page to make sure we've remembered to add alt attributes to each image. So now none of the images have the red border because we did provide alt attributes for all of them. So let's just go here temporarily to our HTML and let's remove the alt attribute from one of these images. So here we have Joe's alt attribute. We'll just go ahead and delete and save. And now if we look at our page, Joe has the red border because we forgot to put an alt attribute there for him. Now I'm going to, of course, fix that with Control Z, put that back and save, and that fixes our page. But that could be very useful, and you could use not, the pseudo class not, for other things as well. Remember, it's going to select whatever does not have what you specify. And now let's look at the nth child selector, which we have used a little bit in previous tutorials. So we'll say card and then no space, and we'll say nth dash child. Now this can be confusing, and it's somewhat because of the way it's worded. You would think we were looking for the child of the card class, but that's not really true. We're going to be selecting the cards themselves. So if we say nth child and the second one, we would be selecting the second profile card. So now let's go ahead and change the background color so we can really see which card we've selected. And I'll say Papaya Whip, and we'll save. And here's the thing to consider now. We've got Matt selected, but he's the last profile card, and we said we wanted the second. But if you remember from the previous lesson, we've used media queries to rearrange the order of our cards. However, if we look back at the HTML, Matt truly is the second card in our HTML. So this nth child selector is going to be based on the actual original order within the HTML, and maybe not what we see on the page if we have reordered the order that was in the HTML with media queries, or even without media queries, we could go ahead and reorder them if we wanted to, but the nth child will not be based on that. Now we could put in other selectors here too. So let's put in odd and save. And now notice Matt was the second child. So the first and the third are odd, and that would be Jane and Joe. Likewise, we could put in even instead, and it will probably select Matt once again and not select Jane and Joe, because Matt is the second, which is even, and of course Joe and Jane, first and third, are odd. So I think you get the idea for pseudo classes. So now let's move on to some pseudo elements that we can add right underneath the card class and the fig caption element. And this would be a descendant selector. So we've got the card class, and the descendants are any fig captions within the card class. So now after that, let's specify card and fig caption once again. But now we'll use 2 colons, and then let's say after. And what we'll do after is create a pseudo element that will have content, and then we can specify what content goes inside. Let's just put hello to start with. And after that, well, I'll just leave it at that to begin with here. I'll need to get rid of that extra quote. There we go. And save. And now let's look at our page. So now we've got Jane Devrel hello. It says hello right at the end. After Joe's last name, Coder hello is immediately after. So maybe we should put a space, and we could highlight that. And now we'll see the hello at the end of each last name a little easier, but it was added to each one of the fig captions. Now we could notice something else about this too. I can select all that text, but I can't select the text that is our pseudo element content. Again, it's not really an element. It was just added in with this after pseudo element selector. So now instead of hello, I want to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to put in an emoji, just some sparkles here. And then I'll put display and block. So this will be on its own line, and save. And now we've got an emoji following each name on each of our profile cards. And likewise, I could switch this to before, and it would normally be on the left side or before their first name, but now because it's a block display, it's above each name. So I'm going to scroll for a little more room, and let's add some more new content here for our fig caption as well, actually for our paragraph now. So let's say card and then the paragraph, and we'll select the before pseudo element. And for content here, we can type a specific value, say open dash quote. And now if I save this, we will get a double quote added to the left, as we see here. It's actually probably a single quote that's added after our other single quote. But we can also add a close quote. So I'm just going to copy this down with Shift Alt and the down arrow, and I'll switch this to an after. And instead of open quote, we'll have close quote and save. And now they've turned into double quotes, and they're wrapping around the single quotes that we already had. But we've added quotes here without having that quote element that we were relying on here inside of our HTML. Notice inside of each paragraph we have the Q element, which is a quote that we were using for quotes. So we could remove those, because one handy thing here is we can style these however we want to. So let's look at an example of that. We could say font-size, I'll put it 3 EM, so that's going to rely on whatever the font size is of the paragraph element to get the EM size. And then let's say position absolute. If you remember when we learned about positions, we'll say top, and we can make this a minus, so minus 0.25 EM, and then left minus 0.5 EM. Now, something else to remember about position absolute, it always needs its parent to have position relative. So here we need to select the paragraph itself and give it position relative. We can save that, and notice our quote on the left got a lot larger. So we were able to really style this quote separately from the rest of the paragraph. Now let's do something similar for the after quote. So once again, give it a font size of 3 EM, position absolute, give it the same top as well, so that would be minus 0.25 EM, but now we'll say right minus 0.5 EM and save. And now we have matching closing quotes on the right. Again, we're adding these as pseudo elements. So let's go back to our HTML quickly and remove those other quotes that we had. So that would be the Q element. I'll highlight that, press Control D twice to get the other two, hit backspace, and now I'll select the closing Q, Control D twice to get the other two, backspace, and save. So we removed those other quotes that we had, and now we have our big quotes in place of those. And we can see they've applied to each one of the profile cards with our pseudo elements. Just a couple of more pseudo elements to look at before we're finished. So for the fig caption, let's once again say card and then fig caption, 2 colons, and now let's say first dash letter. And here inside of this we'll say font dash size. Once again go to 3, let's say rem here because we're applying it directly to that letter, and we should get a larger letter to start out with, but we don't. And why don't we? That's because this got larger itself. Let me go ahead and comment that out and save. And now notice our emoji is back to a smaller size. So this first letter actually applied to the emoji. So let me uncomment that and save, and you'll see the emoji get larger again. So what happens if we put this after instead of before? Now the first letter of each name got larger. So that's something to consider too. If you use the first letter pseudo element, it's going to apply to the before pseudo element if the before pseudo element exists. Now, instead of just the first letter, you could also choose first line, if I remember correctly. And yes, we just made the whole name larger by choosing the first line.